Yo, what's going on, guys? Crispy Flakes here. Welcome to Extra Crispy Man. For today's video, we got a video by Hoops Reference titled Grading Every 2020 NBA Draft Lottery Pick 2 years later. Always super interesting videos to look back and see how players we once were hopeful about progress in their NBA careers. Curious what he says about Killian Hayes. I'm pretty sure only Piston fans like Killian Hayes, not even all Piston fans do. So I'm not expecting good things, but let's get it.
Hindsight is always 2020 in the sports world, so even though we may look back on certain events and think they were insane for happening, at the time, they were probably looking more reasonable and balanced.
Yeah, that move is so
regardless,
sick. Damn.
Though, mistakes
Damn,
are
LaMelo.
mistakes, regardless of what the reaction was at the time, and this brings us to the topic of today's video, and the series of videos coming up here on the channel. I actually did this 2 years ago, where I went through a bunch of the recent NBA drafts, and using hindsight, graded the lottery picks from each draft years after the fact, and now that a few more years have passed, it feels like a good time to revisit this topic and do it again, now that we have even more information at our disposal. Specifically, today we'll be taking a look at the 2020 NBA Draft Lottery, grading each pick made 2 years later. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin.
Let's get it.
Starting things off here, the Minnesota Timberwolves
I'm gonna give us an A+++++,
overall,
especially after this season.
2 years later is a strong
Or next
A.
season, I should say.
Edwards was seen as the top prospect by many at the time of the draft, but it wasn't necessarily unanimous. But now 2 years later, it's very much looking like they got it right, and that he will be the best player from this year's draft. Last season, he elevated his play, scoring over...
He's going to be a top 3, maybe top 5 shooting guard by the end of next season.
For 21 points per game, he became much more
I need a list to look at
season,
to confirm.
And his explosive athleticism is so tough for any defender to contain. He does admittedly play a bit out of control at times, and does definitely need to improve his shot selection
he'll get there
on a
in time.
consistent basis, but for a 21-year-old guard who produces at the level he does, that's just nitpicking. He's one of the most talented young players in the game, and the Wolves have no regrets picking him first. Next up, the Golden State Warriors selected James Wiseman.
It's been an F so far, but yeah.
Wiseman second overall, and unfortunately the grade
so
here
far
after 2 years is an F. This isn't me saying that
I'm actually gonna give him personally an undetermined, because we just haven't really seen him.
Wiseman is a complete draft bust,
like
because
Joel
he very
Embiid?
likely will end up being a productive center eventually, but within the context of how he was selected second overall in an incredibly talented draft, and he's both struggled with
Killian
injuries
Hayes
and demonstrated a lot of bad habits early on in the time that he was on the court, it makes this an objectively bad pick. At the time, LaMelo Ball was viewed as the second best player in the draft. The Warriors passed on the opportunity to draft him, and now LaMelo Ball...
I feel like if they would have drafted a guard, though, maybe Jordan Poole wouldn't have been discovered. And, you know, just like, I wonder how it would have, like, messed with chemistry. At the end of the day, they won a championship, yeah, right?
Wiseman is getting back onto the court this year after being injured all of last year, so we all hope he can start to show some flashes this season, but unfortunately,
next season we gotta see him.
Is more based on where he was drafted than what he actually is as a prospect because of the context. Next, with the third pick, the Charlotte Hornets selected LaMelo Ball, and the grade here is another strong A. The Hornets needed a prospect to build around at the time, and they got it when they selected LaMelo here. In his first 2 seasons, he's been one of the most fun and exciting players to watch. He's already emerged as one of the best passing talents in the NBA, and despite concerns about his ability to score at the time of the draft, he's coming off of a season where he just averaged an efficient 20 points per game. He's so crafty with the ball in his hands, he makes threes at a 39% clip, his court vision is top-notch, and he stuffs the stat sheet on a nightly basis. This past season, he made his first All-Star game, which should be the first of many to come. Up next with the fourth pick, the Chicago Bulls selected Patrick Williams, and the grade here 2 years later is a C+. Patrick Williams being taken 4th overall was pretty surprising on draft night when it happened, but in the 2 years since, this pick definitely hasn't been that bad. Williams has shown some potential on the defensive end of the floor, but offensively, that raw talent that he was at the time is still what he is now, and he's a ways away from it being fully unlocked. He missed most of last season due to injury.
Yeah, for right now, I think he just has to kind of chill, you know, and play like a, I don't want to say like a role player, but, you know, maybe like Wiggins' role on the Warriors, you know what I'm saying? Where it's just like, don't try doing too much, but you know, with the things you do, perfect them. And over time, he'll get more responsibilities and stuff and become a great player.
But when he was on the court, albeit in a small sample size, he did reliably knock down perimeter jumpers just on only a few attempts per game. But he's not really much of a threat to create elsewhere for himself off the dribble at this point in time, and his production of 9 points and 4 rebounds per game don't exactly jump out at you. Ideally, he becomes a solid 3-and-D guy, but when you're drafting 4th overall, you typically hope for someone with a higher ceiling than that. Up next with the 5th pick, the Cleveland Cavaliers selected Isaac Okoro, and the grade for this pick is a B-. Similar to the last selection, Okoro's ceiling is already looking fairly low, where he is a talented defensive player who competes hard on that end, but is a pretty limited offensive threat. He's a decent shooter at best who is mostly used as a spot-up guy and not much else. He can slash to the basket and finish there, but in low.
If you're not going to be like an all-star with a top pick, then you at least have to be like an all-star glue caliber type of player that does all the little things. I think Okoro can be that.
Volume, and
he could be the Marcus Smart,
good minutes in the rotation in his role. But again, when you're picking in the top 5, you should probably be shooting a bit higher, hoping to land someone with star talent, especially in a draft like this that was loaded with talent. The pick wasn't bad, but it just wasn't that impressive either. Next up with the 6th pick, the Atlanta Hawks selected Onyeka Okongwu.
I'm surprised with the B+. I feel like Okongwu has spent a lot of his career early on injured. I feel like we have not seen this guy given a great opportunity yet.
Grade here is a nice B+. 2 years ago, I was someone who was under the impression that Okongwu was the best big man in the draft class, and 2 years later, while it has been a slow process, he has begun to take some big steps forward, especially at the end of last season. Okongwu is currently backing up Clint Capella in Atlanta, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if he overtook that starting center job sooner rather than later.
Hope he does.
Because his extremely versatile defensive skill set is crucial to a Hawks team that otherwise struggles on that end of the floor. He can defend perimeter players as well.
I could see the Hawks kind of like concerned in the sense that, you know, Capella, you know what you got of him. He's a good serviceable center, and I think the Hawks have aspirations to become a great team, and just like the risk factor with letting Okongwu come along. But I don't know, at some point you do kind of have to like throw him in.
Well as protect the rim, then offensively, he finishes incredibly well around the basket, having made 69% of his shots last year. Up next with the 7th pick, the Detroit Pistons selected Killian Hayes, and the grade here 2 years later is unfortunately another F. Any of you who have watched my prior grading videos should know that I'm not necessarily quick to hand out Fs as grades, but it's really hard not to give one here when Hayes is one of the biggest modern examples of being a draft bust. At the time of the draft 2 years ago, I really wanted him to be good, but 2 years later he has barely shown anything worthwhile on the court, and the Pistons are already...
See, I do disagree with that. Offensively, Killian Hayes has been garbage, but this dude's like... I don't know, not everybody's watching every single Pistons game, but just like with Killian Hayes, I don't know, he just has things about him that you can't really teach. I don't know, like I love his playmaking abilities. He's got a nice little bag on him with, you know, with dribble moves. It's just he's not aggressive enough. If Killian Hayes can unlock a little bit of more aggressiveness, I really think he could become like a Ricky Rubio type player at least. His defense, man, he's got potential to be a really good defender. He's just got to take it up a notch. But he's got a lot of really good things about him.
Seemingly
just not so much scoring wise
without him. He's one of the least efficient scorers in the NBA.
Yeah.
He's been a poor defender, and while his court vision and passing...
I don't know, I've seen him do like some nice things defensively, but maybe the analytics speak otherwise, but...
ability isn't that bad. It's not enough to overcome his struggles elsewhere. Next up with the 8th pick, the New York Knicks selected Obi Toppin, and the grade here is a C+. When the Knicks took Toppin here, he wasn't necessarily a player that played a position of need for them, but they believed that he was the best player available. Their intentions were right because you should always be drafting the best player available, but the execution was wrong.
Yeah, they give him a little insurance too, where, you know, if they do want to trade Julius Randle, they got a guy that can step up right away and be their starting power forward.
As now 2 years later, Obi is a decent player at best compared to some of the talent that was available at the time, including Tyrese Halliburton, who most expected to be a top 10 draft pick back then in 2020.
Usually pretty hard on busts, but still believe in him.
And is now looking like a star in the making. Toppin is a decent backup power forward who uses his athleticism to operate well as a slasher, attacking the rim, but he will need to improve his three-point shot to earn a bigger role moving forward. Up next with the 9th pick, the Washington Wizards selected Deni Avdija, and the grade here is a B-. Denny is a player that has established himself as a jack-of-all-trades sort of talent, where he's very skilled and decent at most aspects
a really good
of
season
the game,
next year, I think.
but he really isn't good or great at any specific thing. He'll give you productive minutes, but is probably destined to be a role player throughout his career, so as someone taken in the middle of the lottery, it was a decent pick, but not a great one. Next up, with the 10th pick, the Phoenix Suns selected Jalen Smith.
Am I blind? Did he talk about Tyrese Halliburton already? Or am I blind?
We're getting our third F grade of the video. The Suns were different than most typical
A+ for the Pacers,
teams back
though.
then, in that they immediately became contenders in Smith's first season with them, but it never even felt like the Suns made an effort to give him a chance. On top of this, Smith was viewed as a reach of a pick at the time of the draft too, so them taking him 10th overall just looks even worse in hindsight. The Suns ended up trading Jalen Smith to the Indiana Pacers last season,
break out over
where
there,
he did actually start to show some flashes, but the Suns traded him for Torrey Craig, so essentially the Suns traded a top 10 draft pick for a career role player who scores 6 points per game in his career.
And
that's
his
about as worst
Craig.
case scenario as it can
Damn.
get. Next, with the
lame-ass
11th
name.
pick, the San Antonio Spurs selected Devin Vassell, and the grade here is a B. Vassell doesn't have a flashy game, but he's another player in the 3-and-D mold who has actually shown the most potential of the guys I've mentioned today in that category, yet he was taken near the end of the lottery, making it better value for the Spurs. He's a solid perimeter defender who scored 12 points per game last season. As we get deeper into the lottery too, this is the kind of talent you hope to land, and the Spurs did exactly that. Next, with the 12th pick, the Sacramento Kings
Tyrese went at
selected
12? Tyrese was a 12th overall pick? Damn. I didn't know. Okay. I didn't know he was that. Shit, I guess he was, wasn't he, man? Damn. I don't feel so bad as a Pistons fan now.
Halliburton slipping outside of the top 10 was a head-scratcher 2 years ago, and now 2 years later, it continues to be the case. In Sacramento, Halliburton emerged as one of the best young point guards in the league, and even though he's no longer on the team, as they traded him away, the Kings did get Domantas Sabonis in return for him, who is a bona fide
him and K would have been sick,
so
but
it's
I'm
not
cool with
like
Ivy.
they let him go for a cheap price.
It all worked out.
Absolutely zero complaints about this pick, as it was tremendous for late lottery.
Yeah, no complaints about the pick, maybe complaints about the scenario of him getting traded away.
Next up, with the 13th pick, the New Orleans Pelicans selected Kira Lewis,
torn
and the
ACL
grade
last year,
here
right?
is a C. Lewis hasn't really made much of an impact at the NBA level yet, but in the limited minutes he's gotten, he has shown blistering speed that could be tapped into as his career progresses. He's a young guard that needed time to develop, and is still in that developmental phase, so this can be viewed as a mediocre pick at best. And finally, the last pick of the lottery was Aaron Nesmith, made by the Boston Celtics, and the grade here is a D. The entire appeal with Nesmith as a prospect, to even make him a consideration as a lottery talent at the time, was that he was supposed to be a knockdown shooter, but through 2 seasons, he has shot the ball pretty
basically
poorly,
the Kevin Knox of
and
the
as a
draft
result,
class.
Was unable to even crack the Celtics rotation on a consistent basis. He got traded to the Indiana Pacers this offseason, so hopefully in a team...
I'm gonna lie, the Pacers being kind of smart, scooping up, you know, some of these picks and stuff like that, because given the right opportunity, like... Yeah, Jalen was on the Suns. No opportunity there. Smith was on the Celtics. Not a huge opportunity there. Yeah, man, it's just like, it's interesting. I like it.
But for now, it's more of a bad pick in hindsight. And with that being said...
Right, that's the end of the video there, guys. Great video by Hoops Reference. As always, link to the channel description below. Thank you all so much for watching. And peace out, my friends.